Perfect. I think we're live. So first of all, welcome again to everyone, especially those who are here for the first time. You're joining the 21st Critical Dialogue on Reconciliation. This time on the topic of foreign aid and community reconciliation in Colombia. My name is Lucia. I'm part of Rodemos del Diálogo, and just I'll briefly do a little bit of an introduction to the event series before I hand over. For those of you who don't know Rodemos del Diálogo, so RED or Embrace Dialogue is a Colombian peace-building organization promoting the culture of dialogue. We are involved in different aspects of peace building. We do work in Colombia, especially sort of through peace pedagogy, youth-led projects as well. We do events on a global level, such as this ones, like this dialogue today. And we always try to bring the learnings from Colombia to other places around the world. And we always try to learn from other places around the world and bring those learnings back to Colombia. But we're not the only ones behind a series of events. So we always organize them together with the Winchester Center of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace, which is part of the University of Winchester, and with the Oxford Network for Peace Studies. And this series of events, we're trying to invite practitioners, academics, decision makers on topics of reconciliation to share their experience with us, their activities. But even though we usually have guests we're so proud to have like today as well, we also think that it's such an honor that it's you guys who join these events. And it doesn't really matter whether you're academics, whether you're just passionately interested in the topic, or whether you just want to explore how the spaces of dialogue work or look like. We're really, really thankful that you take the time and join them. And same as every time, also today, we will love to hear from you. So if throughout the first part, this dialogue, any ideas come to mind, any questions, please share them with us. Especially those of you who are with us live, but also for everyone who's watching later on YouTube, there's a space for you to comment. It's going to be a little bit of a different interaction, but we're always excited to see when people interact with the content. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. If there's any more information I can share with you, I will actually. I'll put both on YouTube and in the Zoom. I'll put links to other events we do with RED. I'll put more information on OxPeace, but also on the Winchester Center of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace. Once again, on behalf of Embrace Dialogue and the Center of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace and the Oxford Network for Peace Studies, welcome. I will now hand over to Dr. André Gomez-Suarez, who's the Senior Research Fellow at the Center of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace. This is the longest title that I always struggle with a little bit, but here we go. He's also a member of the OxPeace Steering Committee, and he's a co-founder of Rodemos del Diálogo, and he will convene today's dialogue as every time, and he will introduce today's guest, who I'm really, really thankful that she took the time to join. André?
Thank you, Lucia, and so good to see the faces of friends here in this space, people who have been in the past and people who are for the first time in this space. And in particular, I'm very grateful to Johanna for accepting this invitation today. I will introduce Johanna very shortly. But let me just say that for the center and for OxPeace, it's really important to team up with an organization that is based in the Global South, that is based in Colombia. And in particular, because this organization is trying to promote the culture of dialogue. And we understand that dialogue is not an event that doesn't happen overnight, but that actually is a process that takes a long time to unfold and to be nurtured. So thank you so much to those of you who are coming again to this space, because that you are an essential part of this series that we have been creating, and that this is the 21st dialogue that we have done. The other reason why it's important to team up with Rodemos el Diálogo is because Rodemos el Diálogo sees that 6 principles are very important to nurture the culture of dialogue. And so what we want to do is to put forward those principles now so that all of you who are in this space in this moment and who are going to interact for an hour and a half can embrace them and make this space a really transformative space. So the first principle is that we invite you to be fully present. We call it generosity. So we want you to be here listening to what Johanna is sharing and to what others are sharing so that we can build together new meaning. The second principle is solidarity. So we invite you to listen with empathy, thinking about how the work that we are doing are looking to create a better world with compassion. The third principle is co-responsibility. This space is a space that depends on all of us. So we invite you to hold this space together, to create this space, to realize that your voice and your listening are a fundamental part of this. The fourth principle is honesty. We want to invite you to speak from your experience, to be humble and recognize that probably we don't know everything, and to be genuine. The fifth principle is respect. So we invite you to suspend judgment, to see your own reactions to some of the things that we are sharing and to people's assumptions, and to try to wait before voicing things. And the final thing is self-criticism. We invite you to don't confuse your assumptions with reality, to be critical and open-minded, and to change your mind probably so that the intellectual humility that we embrace allows us all to come out of this space thinking new ideas. So these are the principles that are going to sustain the dialogue today. And we understand dialogue as a horizontal transformative process, which gets closer to David Bohm's idea of creating a stream of meaning flowing among and through and between us. So the invitation today is for you to leave aside the old patterns of interaction, because this is not a seminar, this is not an interview, this is a space of spontaneity for us to think together and to see our individual patterns of thought connecting to other individual patterns of thought and creating a flow of meaning. So how are we going to do this? The first part is going to be laying the ground with Johanna. We are going to start dialoguing. We are going to do just the two of us at the beginning. And then we will take it from there. We will leave those things on the table, and then we would like to start hearing from you, your own thoughts, memories, ideas, and questions. For that reason, we invite you to please do not drop questions or comments on the chat, because we are not going to be reading them. And please to allow your own thought process to flow and see your own patterns of thinking while you are listening to us. Then, when we invite you to talk for 45 minutes, we will listen to your ideas. We will try to take those on board, and we will see where all those incredible ideas take us together. So we don't know where we are going to end up. In order for that to be done, of course, you will have to turn on your microphones, and we invite you to turn your cameras on so that you can voice your comments and your questions. Lucia has already said that this is being live streamed, so be aware that you will be in the live stream video of YouTube when you do that. And then after those 45 minutes, I will wrap up in the last 2 minutes or so, trying to offer some food for thought out of what has emerged in this dialogue, so that we can continue our own internal dialogue flowing with us once we leave this space. So, without further ado, let me introduce and welcome our very, very special guest to the 21st Critical Dialogue on Reconciliation, Johanna Amaya. First of all, Amaya is a great, great friend of Rodemos el Diálogo. She participated in many of the peace breakfasts that we did in Colombia back in 2015. And then she decided to move to the UK, where she is now a lecturer in Latin American politics at the Institute of the Americas, and the director of the master's program in Latin American Studies at University College London. She is a member of the Conflict and Change cluster within the Department of Politics Science. She has a PhD in government from the University of Essex in the United Kingdom, a Master's of Research in Latin American Studies and Bachelor Honors in Political Science and International Relations from the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana in Colombia. Johanna's research interest is at the crossroads of international relations and development, political science, and research methods. She focuses on the impact of international actors upon local dynamics of collective action strategies initiated by civil society agents to foster peace, resilience, and reconciliation amid armed conflict, focusing on gender and ethnic issues in Latin America and the Global South. Her research also touches upon transitional justice, multiculturalism, ethnicity, equality, diversity, and the inclusion of diverse populations, and an inquiry into research methodologies that underpin our comprehension of intertwined global and local phenomena. She has done policy analysis for the European Union, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, the Global Survivors Fund, and the United Nations Development Program. Before coming to the UK, Johanna was associate professor at the Javeriana University and the Nueva Granada Military University in Bogota, and did consultancies focusing on diversity, inclusion, peace building, and community resilience. For that reason, I think we could not have a better guest to talk about foreign aid, community reconciliation in Colombia. So, Johanna, why don't we start with a very simple question to start pitching the ground? What do you understand, or what do we mean by community reconciliation?
Hi, Andre, and hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I feel honored to share the floor with you and with all the participants here in Zoom and online. I will try to talk first about the general concept of reconciliation, and then explain why reconciliation can be a community process drawing on my PhD research. So in general terms, the concept of reconciliation can be defined as a process of building and rebuilding relations among former antagonists in post-war contexts, and also the establishment and reestablishment of trust relations between them and governmental institutions. So it's a very complex concept involving several dimensions. Reconciliation is defined in the sense of restarting interactions with the former aggressor. And there are several conditions in the literature and in the practice of reconciliation, but one of the most important of them is dialogue. The commitment to non-repetitions of the offense, and the requirement that offenders experience a consequence for their grievances to improve relations between parties. So in post-conflict societies, reconciliation is also related to building trust, rebuilding trust between former actors in conflicts in order to enhance the process of coexistence and democratic relations between them. There are also some normative definitions of reconciliation, like building a shared notion of future in the aftermath of conflict. I like that normative perspective because it is also linked with a sense of community reconciliation. But what makes reconciliation a community process? That's the key question here. Reconciliations becomes a community process due to different fundamental conditions. The collective participation, shared experiences, and community-driven strategies for peace building are some of those elements. So first, collective healing and shared stories are crucial when building community reconciliation. Reconciliation within a community context involves addressing shared histories of conflicts, memories of violence or mistrust in the past. And this shared history requires a collective process of healing where community members come together to acknowledge their past harms, they discuss their grievances, and work together towards a mutual understanding, or in some cases, even about forgiveness. So this process is deeply rich in the community's social fabric, where the impacts of conflict are more directly felt and where the healing processes are needed to rebuild these relations between former antagonists. One of the key mechanisms I identify when building community reconciliation is community capacity building. So the role of community capacity building is crucial in fostering reconciliation. And it includes self-reliance, the improvement of social cohesion, and social capital within the communities. Strengthening these elements, communities develop skills, knowledge, and resources needed to manage conflict constructively, rebuild relations, and also to foster a culture of peace and mutual respect. So community capacity building is a foundational component of making reconciliation a community-driven process. And finally, one of the main aspects I identify is empowerment and participation. So reconciliation is seen also as a community process due to the emphasis on empowering community members to take active roles in the reconciliation efforts. And this empowerment is crucial for ensuring that reconciliation processes are inclusive, participatory, and reflective on the community's diverse perspectives and needs. And empowerment involves giving community members the agency to define the terms of reconciliation they require, to identify their priorities for peace building based on their community agenda, and engage in dialogue. Also, the participation in decision-making process is very important. And this participatory, empowering approach ensures that reconciliation efforts are grounded in the realities and aspirations of a community. And the last aspect, which is linked with the overall topic of foreign aid, is the external support and the connection with the local context. So while external support such as foreign aid plays a very important role in facilitating and promoting reconciliation, it's important to understand the community-specific context and needs, the community agenda. And this name of community agenda is taken from some interviews I gather with the members of the ATCC, a peace community in Colombia. So effective reconciliation initiatives are those that are sensitive to local social cultural dynamics that build upon existing community structures and resources. So this local context specificity ensures that reconciliation is not imposed from the outside perspective, but is instead owned and led by the community, making the process inherently communal.
Brilliant. That's great, Johanna. And it's great because precisely in our previous dialogue, we were talking about inside the reconcilers. We were talking about how now the international community and practitioners working in the global north value more and more the work of inside the reconcilers. And we were talking about what are the characteristics of these inside the reconcilers. We were talking about the importance of, with Nick Sherwood from George Mason University. With him, we were talking about the importance of the well-being, the mental health, in order to make sure that the inside the reconcilers can do the contribution to the work, of healing the fabric of communities in conflict-torn regions, and that how this implies from the global north to recognize the agency of these actors and to learn from them in a way, and to empower them. So what you have said is very much connected to that. But it seems to me that precisely what you are bringing into the equation is that when we were thinking about this conversation with Nick, was basically a more individualistic approach, the inside the reconciler as one actor, as an actor that works with other people, that creates a network of actors. Whereas here, your whole approach is more a collective approach to reconciliation, something that, that a collective group of people work together on creating this environment for healing. And you mentioned an organization that you have worked with. And that's precisely what I thought, that probably to give us a taste, you could just give us a couple of concrete examples of how this organization that you have worked with have done a bit of reconciliation work led by the community.
Great. So the ATCC is one of the first peace communities in Colombia. And there are one of the most known examples of community reconciliation, because they won the Peace Alternative Nobel Prize. And I think it has been one of the most fascinating experiences for scholars. So it has been also documented widely. And I think the main element that makes that experience interesting is the fact that due to the collective action of unarmed civilians, was possible to build an experience of neutrality in the midst of war and the confrontation between different armed actors, state and non-state actors. So the community at the beginning was given a mandate, an ultimatum from the armed actors, and they told them, you have to leave, join us, or we will kill you, basically. And they told the armed actors, the paramilitary groups and the guerrillas, give us a week and we will discuss collectively what's our answer to your proposal. So basically, they took this time to discuss together using mechanisms of dialogue, and they decided to join together these groups. They cited the groups, and they started the meeting saying, we are leading this conversation, even though they didn't have weapons, arms. And we are leading this conversation because this territory belongs to us and you are foreigners here. So it's an example of a brave group of peasants that using collective action mechanisms call the armed actors to set the rules for building peace and reconciliation. After several dialogues with different armed actors, including paramilitary groups and the guerrillas, they built the peace community, and they have several setbacks when the main leaders were assassinated by paramilitary groups, but they were resilient and regrew their community and strategies, showing that the power of them was based on collective action and not just leadership. And they started reincorporating former combatants and some combatants and armed actors actually decided to live the violent life because they felt inspired by the peace principles of the ATCC. So when I arrived there as an UNDP member, I was an advisor for the National Commission of Reparation and Reconciliation. They told me that we were talking about reconciliation, transitional justice, as if they were new concepts or new phenomena, when they were doing that for a long time, since the 80s. So they started processes of reincorporation of combatants, setting rules to reintroduce them to the civilian life. And they start to establish relations with them progressively, according to a process that took around 5 years. So this is just one of the examples.
This is brilliant, and thank you so much for that, Johanna. Now, you've mentioned in the first in your first response the important part of external actors, the external support, and you mentioned foreign aid. Now, I'm aware that for many people it's not clear what foreign aid is. So why don't we try to explain generally a basic understanding of what do you mean by foreign aid?
Perfect. So foreign aid in general terms is an instrument of the national policy of a government, and it's part of their foreign aid policy, which contributes in simple terms with money, goods, or services to other governments or people or communities in foreign countries. So the contributions are meant to be given for free. They are subsidized or they are provided under the market prices. And theoretically, these interventions aim to promote economic development, to provide humanitarian assistance from donors. The donors can be governments, NGOs, private organizations, and these donors want to provide this aid to recipient countries or organizations. So foreign aid wants to provide support and assistance, technical support, not just financial support, to another country, region, or organization to promote development, growth, and humanitarian support, in some cases, humanitarian aid. Now, even though this type of international strategy emerged also in the context of expanding the access to socio-economic and environmental rights in order to produce a counterbalance in a very unequal international global context, and the very visible divisions between the global north and the global south, in order to support countries and governments from the global south to improve the access to economic and social rights in the south. There are several criticisms against the role of foreign aid, and some scholars, but also practitioners, have criticized the role of foreign aid as a tool to expand these dynamics of unequal power in the global landscape. So there are contested views on the role of foreign aid. In one hand, some authors, scholars, and practitioners believe and have demonstrated and provide evidence about the positive role of foreign aid in promoting the protection of human rights, creating peace building, promoting reconciliation, while other branch of the literature has been more critical and have analyzed, for instance, how foreign aid has helped to spread the economic interests of some powers. But it really depends on the agency and on the approaches they use. And in one section of my dissertation, I analyze how the implementation approach of foreign aid makes a difference. So some agencies, such as the USAID, tend to use more a top-down approach, where they define the agenda from the headquarters, and the foreign aid members go to the field and verify some aspects, but basically define their agenda for the center. They negotiate with governments, but according to communities' perception, the communities' views and agendas are not included in their projects, and neither during the implementation process. The other type of implementation approach is the bottom-up approach, and it tends to be more linked with the European Union interventions, according to the evidence I have gathered. It also could have some limitations, of course, but the community members perceive that the European Union is closer to the community. They have presence on the field. They support them. They make their claims visible internationally and helps to protect them. But most importantly, they include the community agenda, the pre-existing agenda, into their efforts. And there is a beautiful metaphor there that I took from the interviews to name this chapter of my dissertation, which is building bridges. So you can build bridges from the top-down approaches to connect to sectors of the community to promote efficiency, to transport goods and people, or you can build that bridge, align it with the community needs to reconnect two parts that were already divided due to the conflict, and aligning with the community's agenda. So I think it's not that black and white, as I say in my classes. So it really depends on several factors, but the implementation approach makes a difference.
And listening to you, it makes me think about how important the international community has been in the case of Colombia, for example, after the implementation of the peace agreement, when, to continue with the implementation of the transitional justice mechanisms, for example, we know that most of the funding for the work of the Colombian Truth Commission came from, international actors and the international community, and how part of the special jurisdiction for peace that's been done trying to achieve, the sort of justice in Colombia is also supported by the international community. So I guess, these the monies of the international community have been fundamental to keep the peace building process in Colombia going. And so, Johanna, why don't we connect these two things? Because when we are thinking a bit about community reconciliation, I guess in a hostile environment like Colombia, and when we think about foreign aid and this bottom-up approach that you mentioned that the EU has, it is important to try to think about the connection between both of them. So what is the connection, and why is it important to think about the role of foreign aid in community reconciliation in Colombia, and what's the role that has played?
Right, that's a very interesting question, and I hope I can provide also a very interesting answer, an equally interesting answer. So I would like to talk first about the role of foreign aid in post-conflict societies, and how it links foreign aid with the role of community reconciliation. So post-conflict societies are very devastated. The economies are affected by the dynamics of war and conflict. So resuming the everyday social lives requires a transitional period between the cessation of hostilities and building political stability. So that period can be shorter or longer, but according to the studies, it can take around 2 or 5 years, depending on the specific dynamics of the case. So the role of the international communities is crucial here, because multilateral and bilateral agencies and intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, and the private sector can intervene to reconstruct and support structural reforms and institutional building and transformation after armed conflicts. There are several specific actions that foreign aid can support to promote peace and reconciliation. But I have identified in my research some crucial aspects. First is that foreign aid can serve as a mediator. So aid agencies come to the local territories and they act as guarantors of rights and protectors of civilians from armed state and non-state actors through different strategies performed, such as I mentioned before, local presence, monitoring the territories with direct contact with the community members, and that's very important for them. They also help to make visible the violations in the territories with direct contact with the community members, and they promote the strengthening and creation of social organizations, the civil society organizations in the region, in the local communities, and they implement programs or projects to promote political participations, human rights protection, but most importantly, they provide resources to make these initiatives a reality. So in a very polarized conflict, the international agencies, foreign aid agencies, can be seen and taken as mediators, as third parties, negotiating between or among several violent actors and the communities. So civil society organizations perceive them as guarantors of their rights and protectors of their rights. They perceive that these actors were separated from local political dynamics of polarization, and they also felt, according to the interviews I gathered, their rights back to create economic conditions to build a sustainable peace and reconciliation. So in one of the interviews, they mentioned that they gave their dream back because they could put in place their community life plans again. So in this sense, I'm building on the first part of our conversation. I think that this is not just about building a shared notion of future, but also connecting that notion of shared future with a past dream community or past community dream of life. So there was already a shared notion of future in the past that foreign aid in this case helped to rebuild when encourage community capacity building, when it's built from the bottom. The second aspect is communication. The foreign aid agencies facilitated communication between local organizations and international governments or international actors. And the armed actors respected their interventions because they were afraid of the international consequences of making visible the violations they have committed. So the international actors, as I mentioned before, protected the civilians from the the violence of armed actors. So as a result, the communities perceive these actions as a first step to repair the communities and as a way to build institutions where the lack of governmental institutions was very visible. So it can be also linked with this notion of rival governance, but the community also built a parallel governance during the conflicts, and it was highly supported by international actors. Some scholars have explored how communities develop mechanisms to protect themselves during war. But I think which hasn't been analyzed enough is how international actors supported those efforts and protected communities to develop those mechanisms. And in practical terms, there is a significant amount of financial flows focus on foreign aid, but specifically on the 16 development goals, which is building peace, justice, and inclusive institutions. So I was wondering what was the fact of those intervention and those resources, because of course, as I mentioned before, foreign aid is not just about financial flows, but also technical support. But one of the main questions that motivated my research was if the intended purposes were really being accomplished, and if beyond that, they were really satisfying their beneficiaries. So peace is one of the most important conditions when building development in a post-conflict scenario. And I wanted to know if these flows of financial resources and technical support were linked with community needs, and how the mediation of governments affected this distribution of resources. And I think that the main answer I found to that question was that the mediation of governmental agencies and institutions was higher, and their interference in the process when the donors used the top-down approach. So the beneficiaries felt that foreign aid was aligned with governmental needs, but not with their community needs. And as the government was perceived as part of the conflict, they were not satisfied with foreign aid interventions when those interventions were aligned just with the governmental agenda. In some interviews, they said like USAID and the government are the same. They have the same agenda and they don't care about our real needs. But that interference decrease or tend to decrease when the donors perform a bottom-up approach.
Actually, and on that note, Johanna, I would like to ask or make a comment and then see your reaction to that, and then open the floor. So if people now is starting to, to see where they are and would like to either make a comment or pose a question, it's a good moment to start putting your hands up so that we know who is gonna go first. But so to give you the time to start putting your hand up, let me come back to you with something, because as I was listening to you, one of the most striking experiences that I don't know if we have mentioned this here, but it's been part of the research that many people have done, and our personal experience in Rodemos el Diálogo, was with the implementation of the peace agreement with the FARC. And one of the things that happened was that we were in one of these projects that was precisely about reconciliation and precisely engaging communities, engaging journalists, engaging teachers from the different departments of Colombia. And because it was about reconciliation, the whole idea was that they wanted to organize some meetings with former combatants of the FARC. Mm-hmm. Now, the donor, the founder of this project, was USAID. And at the time, the FARC, even though they had laid down the weapons, were still considered a terrorist organization. That meant that even though the community wanted to invite former combatants of the FARC to those meetings, we could not invite them because the money of the taxpayers of the US could not be used for that. And the communities were absolutely frustrated and disappointed because they could not understand, how do we do reconciliation without the other? How do we do that? So with that said, Johanna, what would you say that is perhaps another of the downsides of this foreign aid? What are the challenges that we have to overcome when we are thinking about community-led reconciliation processes that sometimes the donors don't understand, even if they claim that they are doing it listening to the communities?
Great. Yes, that's a very interesting question, Andre. I also had the opportunity to work as an advisor, external advisor for USAID. I was advising them on building the concept of reconciliation and trying to understand how to measure that concept. And at the time, I naively asked, what's the selection criteria for your interventions? I saw the map there and I said, there are not experiences included there, such as ATCC, which are extremely relevant, or other peace communities like San Jose de Apartado. So what's happening here? What's the selection criteria? And they told me first that they were focused on areas where illicit crops had presence. So even though they are promoting reconciliation efforts and peace on paper, there is also a strategic aim behind. So there is not such a thing like foreign aid in general. So we need to
we lost you.
It was accidental, yeah. Sorry. So we need to analyze the context depending on the specific donor or agency. But I think there are several strategies, for instance, USAID have used to, I would be honest, to pretend that they are including the community. Because it was basically the testimony I got from the community. So they said that they identify a couple of leaders that most of the time are not representative of their interest. They interview them and they fulfilled a formal registration of their consultancy to legitimize the community needs. So there are many bureaucratic formal ways to say you are gathering communities' views and demands. But from peace communities that have been dialoguing since the 80s and developing a lot of time understanding this process, it's not just about asking questions to a couple of people. It's about building dialogue mechanisms and gathering the result of those dialogues. And it takes time, effort, and resources, and of course, foreign aid resources are limited and they have to be as efficient as possible. But other donors, mostly from Europe and the European Union, have took the time to send members of their offices to the field to talk to people, to gather information. I was one of them. We spent many meetings and we built dialogues to understand what their needs are. So local presence, keeping in mind limited resources and needs of efficiency, are one of the main obstacles. The inclusion of pre-existing community plans, strengthening those pre-existing installed capacities, because we don't start from scratch. And I think the great benefit of this is that short-term interventions are efficient in the short term, like building that bridge just to connect, to improve the efficiency of the local production is a great goal. But if the community doesn't feel that the result of that intervention is appropriated by them because they were integrated into the decision, it doesn't have a long-term effect. So there are some buildings and interventions that have been abandoned because the community doesn't feel that they belong to them.
Brilliant. I mean, yeah, it doesn't contribute to sustainable reconciliation, but we have many, now I can see already some hands up, and I think we've put a lot of things on the table. So let's see where this is gonna take us. So let's start with Raju.
Thank you very much. Fascinating conversation. There's so many questions, but I'm gonna limit it to one. But I had a lot of questions. It seems like there was a lot of political will and courage to do the reconciliation, to move into that area with transitional justice. Was there a process to overcome the stigma, to build that courage? Was there difficulty for people to expose themselves, bring up old wounds, point to the perpetrators? Was there fear that came up? And so maybe we're talking about the courage that came through. And also the second part of the question is, how do you measure the Sustainable Development Goal number 16? Where are the measurements for that? And I'm really enjoying this, so thank you.
Thank you, Raju. And I think that's this idea of how the communities deal with the stigma and whether it's being funded. I mean, I think that's such an important question. Let's go to Harry.
Hi, thanks so much, Johanna. Thanks, Andre, as well. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Blavatnik School of Government here in Oxford, and I'm also on the OxPeace committee with Andre. So very happy to be here. I'm really fascinated with some of the comments that have been made about the government, the state in this. You mentioned at the beginning that part of your understanding of reconciliation is between the citizens and the state. And then as you've been elaborating, the state has been cropping up as a problem, a blocker. It's when USAID is working with the state, it's seen as illegitimate, or it's rejected rather by local communities. So I guess the short question is, when is the state a help and not a hindrance? And in these cases of reconciliation, and then I suppose the footnote question is, because many of the endeavors of foreign aid into fragile context is trying to build state capabilities and a more stable state. And so but then that seems to be disconnected. That maybe a more coherent and strong state seems to be possibly a problem and disconnected from the needs of reconciliation. And well, first, is that an accurate characterization? And if so, what's your reflections on when the state can be a help rather than a hindrance?
Brilliant. Thanks, Harry. We also have Simon Fisher. That's amazing. Simon, welcome, and great to hear you here. You're mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm really enjoying this discussion. I just want to add one little piece to it. I was very interested in the example you gave, Johanna, of community reconciliation, but essentially between the insurgents and the community. I am quite familiar with a number of examples of where local communities have reconciled within themselves around the conflicts. But do you have anything to say? Does anyone have anything to say about whether one can scale up from these community-based reconciliation initiatives to something bigger, or does it have to be top-down? And if so, any kind of structures or principles that you can suggest for how such an infectious and important process can catch on more widely than in small places at small times, but always subject to the big systems which very often drive them down.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks for putting the question to the whole group here. And that's brilliant. And if you want to come back with some ideas also, that's they are very, very, very welcome. So let's see where Johanna has been taken with the different questions that have been put on the table at the moment. And then after that, we will do another round to see if Johanna's thoughts has created more questions or comments or ideas. And if someone else wants to help answering these sort of complex issues of relationships between community and the state, foreign aid, and how to scale up. Johanna, over to you.
Great questions. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I have a precise answer for all of them, but I have comments and ideas inspired by those questions and following this dynamic of dialogue Andre introduced earlier. I would like to break the dynamic of a seminar and take more reflections on that questions to build together. So on overcoming community stigma, that question and comment about the difficulty of community members exposing themselves to armed actors remind me the fact that at the very beginning, before the peace communities were built, they were subjects of stigma. So they were aligned either with paramilitary actors or rebels, or sometimes as allies of the army. So the way of breaking that stigma was creating these initiatives and to promote collective action, to say loud that they were different and they were neutral. And it was such a successful answer, using collective strategies to differentiate themselves from that stigma in the midst of polarization within the armed conflict. So that's the initial reflection I have around that question. And regarding Harry's comment on the role of state and the dimension of the political dimension of reconciliation when building and rebuilding trust towards government and democratic institutions, probably I would like to detangle the argument better, especially in the context of Colombia and from the community views I have gathered. So the presence in the very rural, isolated regions of Colombia of the state was differentiated but the basic form or expression of the governments were the presence of armed actors, basically the army. Progressively, the army developed alliances with paramilitary actors. When I went there to the field for the first time as a UNDP member, people were afraid about saying, when we asked who was here, what were the armed actors, what were the perpetrators, they said, well, paramilitaries, the guerrilla, FARC, ELN. They were afraid about saying the army. They thought like, the army. But as the conversation progressed and we had more dialogues, and we created trust, they felt free to say that actually they perceive the army and the paramilitary actors as the same actor. So that's sorry to say that the government was already an illegitimate actor because it was taken as a part of the armed conflict, one actor of the armed conflict. So of course, foreign aid interventions are crucial here to rebuild trust towards governmental institutions, but also this third-party action needs to rebuild legitimacy towards those institutions, and more crucially, promote institutional transformations during the transitional period within the state, and especially the armed forces, to create acknowledgement, recognition from the perpetrators. The former governments have said that they were state members or government members, but there is a public responsibility that needs to be recognized, acknowledged in order to rebuild that legitimacy. So since legitimacy was already broken, the role of international actors such as foreign aid agencies, rebuilding states, it's crucial here. And that's at the national level. At the local level, there is variation around the country. But I think a general pattern is that the governments were perceived, even the local governments were perceived as part of one of the armed actors or aligned with armed actors, depending on the region, sometimes paramilitary, sometimes rebels. So the detangling that those alliances built during the conflict period is crucial to rebuild trust towards governmental institutions, to build transparency, and to get accountable about the violations committed. So that's my reflection on that question. And finally, I would like Simon more to elaborate the comment on understanding the process within the big system. What do you mean by the big system? And I would like to understand better that comment to provide some comments.
Sure. Well, it's an age-old question, really, about bottom up and top down, and particularly in relation to conflict transformation and reconciliation. I think you gave us an example of what sounds like quite a transformative process for that community when they were confronted with having to give a response. And I guess there was a significant change within that community. But it led to my thinking about, you can get community level change here and there quite a lot, but how, in your experience, in anyone's experience, does this get connected so that you build a movement for reconciliation? Or is it, as it's sometimes seen, basically are these isolated examples until you get something from the top down, no doubt supported by foreign aid, which has a political interest in an outcome? So is it always that way, or can we also see something coming up from the bottom? And if so, what are the kind of structures and relationships that might help that happen? Because my assumption is that something that builds from the bottom will ultimately be more sustainable and more fair, but it'll take longer.
Yes, great. That's a very interesting common question.
Yeah, so it's how do you go from the local to the national level? And I think we can leave the question hanging on the air if you wish, Joanna, and we can come back to this, because I think it's a really complex question, but we can try to answer it in different ways. I see that Lucia is got her hand up too, so that can contribute to our own sort of thought process unfolding with new elements, that we can always come back to these issues. And I invite others who are in the space who also would like to contribute to create this shared meaning together, to put your hands up and continue nurturing this dialogue. So Lucia, over to you.
Thank you so much. I actually, for me also, like, the story of the Colombian community really resonated. And I think I don't have, it's not a similar question to Simon, but kind of somehow related. Even though before Simon posed this question, I felt I'm completely out of the, I'm going completely out of this flow. But I was also wondering, when you have something like that, like something that starts bottom up, and even if not really, but if you have a group of people that starts a process like that, for me, like, an interesting question would also be, what's the spillover effect on their personal lives? Like, does it affect their relationships with the people outside of this process, and like in a positive way, because it changes how they approach communication, for example, or in a negative way, because maybe when you find like sort of this strong movement with a community that has like this higher goal to achieve something, are you alienated then from people who don't join that? Or how does it, I guess like I was starting to think about, how does something like that spread or not spread through the community? Does it do that? And can we help support it in some way if it does?
Great. Thanks, Lucia. And I can see that Fergal is also wanting to jump into the space. So Fergal, over to you.
Thank you, Andre, and thanks for a really interesting discussion, Johanna. My question was in regards to the role of official or state or collective apologies in the reconciliation process. You mentioned forgiveness sometimes being a part of the collective healing process, but I was just wondering if you saw a role and what level of importance that role is for apologies or other acts of remorse, not necessarily apologies, but yeah, apologies and acts of remorse, where that fitted in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fergal. And I can see that Raju wants to contribute again. So Raju, come back and then we see where we are.
Sure, thank you so much. I just wanted to add the element of misinformation was the Colombia success story at a time when misinformation was not having to be an element of combat? And is that now something that you have to deal with more? Thank you so much.
Sorry, Johanna, if you allow me, I want to come back with a couple of things to add to this conversation, and then we weave it together. One thing is coming, because I cannot stop thinking about something related to the question that Raju asked at the beginning, that you answered in a way that made me think that I was thinking in a different way about that. And it's this idea of the work that communities do to counter stigmatization of the former combatants. For example, not of them as a group that gets stigmatized, the community, but of former combatants. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges. One of the most beautiful examples that I saw, Raju, in Colombia was a group of artists, of a collective of artists in southern Colombia, who actually decided to go to one of the FARC demobilization camps and paint the the houses of the former combatants with lots of different colors, and they painted, sort of images of the former leaders of the FARC who had died during combat. And in a way, it was a way of inviting the communities through art to see these former combatants as people who should be received within the community and be seen with different eyes. But when I think about the money that was put to support these initiatives, was very little from the international community, at least at that stage. It was the early days. It was at the beginning of the FARC, the decommissioning their weapons. So, there was the stigma upon the FARC combatants by international actors was still very, very very much alive. But the communities that were living with them on the ground, and some of the people who were there, were already moving forward. And I think that's really interesting because it's connected to what Simon is asking. Sometimes the communities actually can move very quickly in order to rebuild the social fabric, but the external actors become the obstacle. Or actually, they don't end up supporting it, even though they are talking about let's scale this up. But actually, the scaling up is framed in a very particular approach to this. So I think that's one of the examples where I think, it made me think a lot about what you were talking about. And then the other thing, I think, connected to the question that Harry asked, and then we come back to see where Johanna is related to this idea that I think Johanna put it really well, and is connected to the scaling up that Simon is asking about, and is that reconciliation happens like in two different continuums. And one is this idea of vertical reconciliation, that is between the institutions and the communities, that is very important to happen in places like Colombia, where the state is one of the main actors responsible for gross human rights violations. So that's vertical in the way that the state is the authority in charge of protecting the people of the country, and actually at the same time the perpetrator. So you need to put money in the direction to try to undo the wrongdoing that you yourself carried out as the state. But this horizontal reconciliation that is between communities, sort of more like social cohesion, you could call it. So I think we need to work in both dimensions. We're thinking about, how is not only bottom up or top down, but it needs to be a holistic approach to it, where both elements need to complement each other. But I don't know, Johanna, where are you with all these new questions that have been put forward on the table?
Great. I think the conversation is becoming more interesting, and I will elaborate first on your comments, and I will come back to your comments. So that aspect of the peace communities fighting against stigmatization of combatants is crucial, and it has been happening, I think, since the 80s. I know, or I have in mind, two specific examples. The first one from the NASA people in Cauca, where I also conducted fieldwork, and they used the healing process to reincorporate the ex-combatants. But one of the most striking sentences I have heard during my fieldwork is that you scholars, you think that reconciliation is happening between people that don't know each other, but we are the same people. So the combatants are our relatives, sometimes our friends, or members of our neighborhood. So we already know them. So the communitarian bonds were helpful to reestablish those relations using different mechanisms. In the case of ethnic communities, for instance, the process of healing and the rituals to reincorporate them into the community was crucial. But in other cases, such as the ATCC, they established a very clear process of reincorporation. But there were also very everyday pragmatic ways of incorporating them that were, for instance, having the nicknames, which was a very common community practice. So it creates or recreate a sense of community or belonging to the community again. So there are simple steps, everyday actions that sometimes are overlooked, but are very important for ex-combatants to rebuild their lives within the communities and to overcome stigmatization. And coming back to Simon's question and Andrei's comment, probably one way to think about this interaction between the bottom-up and top-down approach, which is also related to Lucia's question, is talking about hybrid peace, taking the concept from McGinty, and also hybrid ways to implement these efforts to promote foreign aid, because at the end, the goal is similar, but we use different mechanisms. So a middle ground or a spiral way, if we want to observe it in a graphic manner, in a visual, will be thinking about integrating parallel processes that are happening and nurturing the same goal from the top down and from the bottom. But keeping an eye on monitoring the process of transformation and the required structural institutional dynamics that need to be reformed due to the dynamics of violence and conflict. And regarding the spillover effect, as far as I know, the effect of peace communities was very contagious. They are more than 30 now. At the beginning, they were 1 or 2 isolated experiences, but now they have a national network of peace experiences. They share learnings together. They have committees. Actually, using the snowball strategy was useful for me because they recommended very easily each other. They know their particular experiences, and they have installed collective institutional learnings to grow, and they also have built bonds with international experiences. So this is extremely interconnected. It's a real network. What else? The role of misinformation. I think it has been crucial to extend the dynamics of polarization that are very natural during the conflict time, but also are natural during the post-conflict. So the misinformation plays a role in setting back this progress the communities have been building, and in promoting stigmatization and other types of dynamics linked to the past. But since the nature of a transitional period is not linear, it's about taking one step forward and probably some back to resume again. This is a matter of resilience. And I think the communities has been very good at understanding and using setbacks in conflict, misinformation, polarization to build strength again and move towards their peace goals. There is another comment on the role of apologies and forgiveness. From the conceptual point of view, we tend to distinguish reconciliation and forgiveness. And some people equate both concepts, but I think the concept of forgiveness is related to an individual process, and it's an individual decision to accept or basically forgive the former perpetrator, while the reconciliation process is more complex. It's about building relationships, and it doesn't mean you have to forgive the perpetrator. And I think sometimes some interventions are aimed to promote forgiveness, but I find that it represents some ethical problems because the victims have a moral superiority we have to respect, and we need to understand their process. So it's an absolute individual process related to the individual's will, while reconciliation is a political process because it involves rebuilding relations and promoting coexistence between the survivors to give them agency, and the former perpetrators, involving the role and the reconstruction of the institutional framework, the support from governments and international organizations. But of course, the role of truth commissions and the role of apologies and recognitions and acknowledgement and memory initiatives are crucial in this transitional period to repair the victims. It depends not just on the international standards that establish this as an important criterion, but also on the community's needs and demands.
And actually, I was thinking on that point, Johanna, that and perhaps connected to this question, this comment on apologies, that I guess one of the interesting things that happened in Colombia in the middle of the negotiations with the FARC was the official apology of President Juan Manuel Santos to the peace community of San Jose de Apartadó for the wrongdoings of the military brigade in Urabá that contributed to the killings of some of the members of the community. And so there was this state apology. But actually, the way how the apology was issued was not very much or did not necessarily contribute to, let's say, vertical reconciliation, because the community was not happy in the way how the apology was put forward. Many scholars have discussed this, amongst one of them, Gwen Barnett, but in particular, my wife, for those of you who do not know, but in particular, one of the things that the community complained a lot about was that they were not present in the space, in the physical space where the president issued the apology and offered the apology. So, I guess, again, I think, as Johanna was saying, these acts of apologies are very important, but framing a political apology that is an act, a political act, is something that needs to be co-constructed, to put it in some ways. You cannot just stand up and offer the apology, but it's how do you invite and the community, talk to them, they tell you what they are expecting, how they would like to receive that apology, and then move in that direction. And I think based on that experience, probably, I don't know what Johanna would think about it, but the FARC and the government learned that lesson. And I'm now remembering, don't know if you remember this, Johanna, the apology that Pastor Alape, the commander of the FARC, did in Bojayá with the victims of the massacre of Bojayá. And that was a whole consultation process of the FARC going there behind the scenes, talking to the people, asking how they wanted to do the lineup of the people, how the whole thing was going to happen. And I remember Sergio Jaramillo, the former High Commissioner for Peace, coming and making it a meaningful space based on how the community needed the apology to be issued, even though it was a political apology. So I think that's another way of learning this idea of building reconciliation, as Johanna said, is not a linear process. It's a process that we sort of transform the mistakes into opportunities, and we learn all the time and try to do things better, but sometimes undo the good things that have been done when the political agenda changes. So it's non-linear. So I'm aware of the time, Johanna. I wanna give you one last chance to perhaps come back with something, and not only you, but anyone from the space and from the floor, if you have any final comment or question that you would like to make before we start wrapping up and giving the chance to Johanna to give us one last comment and food for thought.
Well, one comment on apologies and the way they are directed. So the first condition for an apology is that it has to be sincere. It doesn't have to be formal. But it also, as reconciliation processes and interventions, requires personal presence. In one of the interviews, one of the peasants told me that the eye of the owner nurtures the horse. So for local communities, the presence makes a difference. So face-to-face contact allows recognition, and recognition is one of the first steps we need to transit when building reconciliation, because it's about rebuilding human relations and recognizing the human status of the other. So that's my final comment, and I'm very, very happy to share with you any other final comments you would like to express.
Thank you, Johanna. I mean, if you know, knowing that it's 5:30, let me wrap up with a few comments that I think I'm trying to just try to show you where my thought process is going. And after this very, very rich hour and a half of ideas that have been put on the table and that we have been trying to weave together, and perhaps with this we can go on and continue thinking about them. The first thing is that foreign aid can be both a force for good or a force for evil. That's necessarily contribute to reconciliation. It all depends how we frame it. And I think Johanna has given us really interesting ideas on how different actors who actually do foreign aid approach the whole thing. So, of course, all of these ideas of foreign aid framed through the 16 development goals of peace and reconciliation are not a panacea for really building that world, but at least give us the opportunity to think about how do we want to try to do advocacy for a better use of foreign aid when we're really thinking that we want to do it from the needs of the communities. So I think that's the first big important thing that has been put on the table. Then the second one is that community reconciliation is something that's been happening on the ground for a very long time, well before the Colombian state started talking about reconciliation, well before the transitional justice institutions were creating this top-down approach. And the communities, in order to live in their territory, find ways to engage with the actors who are carrying out violence, but not only to engage them and to put distance and to try to contain the violence that they carried out, but they also open up opportunities to reincorporate those members of the illegal armed groups into their own communities. And they find mechanisms that are embedded in their everyday life practices. And I think Johanna has been incredible at sharing with us the experience of the ATTC in Colombia. Third, and finally, I guess one of the things that has been on the table is the important role of how we can go beyond these pockets of reconciliation. Because when we have a conflict like the one in Colombia, we can have these incredible, beautiful 30 examples of peace communities promoting reconciliation on the ground. But when you don't manage to break the system of war that is happening across the whole country, what you get is that violence moves from one place to the other. And when it doesn't move, they keep targeting the groups or the leaders who are working on community reconciliation. So the question of how do we scale it up, is it only through foreign aid? Or can foreign aid help scaling up these small cases, pockets of reconciliation into national reconciliation? Is a question that we cannot answer in this space. It hasn't been answered. We don't know if it's possible or not. can it be done in a different way? Can it be done building a national movement of reconciliation, gathering the 30 spaces and 250 spaces so that we don't go from a top down, but a bottom up? I guess that's, again, a question that remains very much open. I think Johanna has been saying that we need to work on parallel channels and parallel processes, hybrid connections between top down and bottom up. And I think that's perhaps, the final comment on this is, yes, reconciliation is a non-linear process, takes steps forward and steps backward, but hopefully sustainable reconciliation means that once the communities have started this and the spillover effects take place, a country starts moving in a direction that in the long term can allow the next generations not having to live through the war that the previous generations have faced. And the seed for that is in the communities that have given us reasons for hope in the case of Colombia. So with that in mind, probably I would like to ask you to please turn your microphones on and to give a round of applause to Johanna, who has helped us to think about these issues and has joined us today in this critical dialogue on reconciliation. And thank you so much for coming. And hopefully we'll see you in our next critical dialogue on reconciliation.
Thank you very much, Andre, for having me. You said at the beginning that it would be a dance, and I saw that it was a beautiful choreography.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.